So, David, have you got 5 minutes?
That is the archetypal Teams message you get in modern offices, which is the code for something's really gone wrong or I'm about to hand my notice in.
How do you tell your boss that you're quitting without telling them that you're quitting?
Reject every meeting in your diary.
That's standard for me anyway. I am a meeting phobe.
You set up a podcast so you can do it publicly with a bit of panache.
Yes. Good answer. For one last time, welcome to Agonomics with David and Jack.
Last time with you, maybe, but not for the show.
I'm Jack Watts, off to pastures new.
Splitter. And I'm David Udall, very much remaining part of the furniture here at AHDB, and indeed this Agonomics podcast.
The show takes a deep dive into the world of agriculture and economics, and will continue to do so for many, many more episodes, I'm sure.
Each week we, or rather I, try to make sense of the numbers and the impact they're having across the land.
I like to think we've helped.
Hopefully, some of what we've talked about has sunk in and been of some use.
This week, we're tying up a few loose ends.
More like separating the wheat from the chaff.
As we potter around the sectors
and offer some musings.
Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. I know I will be in future.
New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch.
Comment on any of AHDB's social channels.
Or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk and let us know where you're listening.
There's been a fair bit of spam in the Agonomics inbox recently, but I'd like to thank all those who've previously dropped us a line to say you've been listening. It's always heartening to know that our work is appreciated, or finding out who's attending the 2024 Americas and Food Beverage Show. I've not been to that one. And who knew that a fellow dog walker in my neighbourhood was a fan of the show? I'll be joining them as I switch from presenter to full-on Aggie.
And for one last time, we've both got a mystery word, phrase or thing or person that quite frankly has no right to be in a podcast about agriculture or economics to try and slip in unnoticed. Right, Jack, today is actually officially your last day at AHDB, isn't it?
It is, yep.
And being the diligent employee that you are in the office to drop off all your equipment and say your last goodbyes as we let off fireworks and flares and stuff like that to let you depart. But unfortunately, I'm not there. And I was due to be there with you so that we could have some kind of, fond farewell as I get all teary-eyed as you drive off into the distance and I'm just like shouting after you, "I'm going to miss your Crocs, Jack," or something like that. But I've got a bit of a problem. I don't have a car at the moment.
Oh.
So my car got wrote off last week. And the story behind it is quite good. Me and my wife and my 3-year-old were due to be going to Centre Parks for a week because the boy likes swimming, so just throw him down the rapids and see if he survives kind of thing.
Brilliant.
And on the way, we went to drop off a birthday card to my friend Stuart. And as we turned around the bottom of his road, there was a little bit of water at the bottom of his road.
Oh, no.
With all of the rain, yeah. And my wife was driving and I was in the front of the car and she went, "Do you think we'll go through it?" And I went, "Oh, we've been through that water loads of times. Just put your foot down and go." I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit deeper than what we thought. So we went in and very quickly we realised we'd made the wrong decision. At that point, you'd like this, I turn into some kind of like Incredible Hulk, He-Man kind of thing, open the window, climb out the window, jump out of the car into the water, straight up to like probably belly button kind of area.
Ooh,
kind of thing.
That's not warm either.
After that initial shock, use all of my strength, start pushing the car out of the water. And I was so close to saving it. And then it got beached, it got stuck on the grass bank trying to get out. And then I couldn't get it any further. And at that point, it died. Obviously, I had to get some help getting it out. So, nice old boy turns up, helps us get it out. Fire brigade turn up, all kicking off. So for my 3-year-old, he's loving it because there's flashing lights and all's brilliant. Carry him out, sit him there, get all the stuff out of the car. Someone comes and helps us take our stuff away. And then we basically just left it there and rented another car and went to Centre Parks. And that is the story as to why I'm not physically with you in the office on your final day to get all emotional and teary-eyed. It isn't just a load of nonsense just because I wouldn't want to cry in front of people and I'm trying to avoid it, obviously. I'm in the market for a new car. And do you know the best thing of it? We'd gone and hired a new car, threw all our stuff in it. I was driving down the A6 south of Leicester and I turned to my wife and I said, to try and lighten the mood, "Well, at least I've got a good story for the podcast now that I can tell Jack."
Absolutely.
So on today's show, we're going to have a bit of a run round of all of the sectors and I suppose have a bit of a review of everything we've spoken about over the last 16 episodes. And we're going to kick off with cereals. And Jack, I'm going to give you, each time we go through a sector, I'm going to give you the price when we started the podcast and where we are now. So for cereals, November and May futures. First episode was released in early June, and at that point we had futures around 205 for Nov and 210 for May 25 round figures. And ever since then, we've not been helping the cereals price with this podcast, that's for sure. That we've gone down to just over 180, 183 for November and 196 for May.
Probably the most challenging sector economically at the moment, I think it's fair to say. The weather and the markets aren't really helping producers right now. And of course, you've got empathy with what the weather's currently throwing at farmers trying to get their crops in the ground, because you try to plant a car. I don't know if you were trying to grow a calf using aquaponics or something, but...
I thought if you plant one, you get 10 more, don't you? That's my money-making scheme.
Yeah, flawless. We came in and through that growing season, earlier in the summer, there was some action, wasn't there, in the markets? Everyone was kind of getting a little bit excited what's happening in Russia, the Russian crop, but it's kind of, I guess, not really materialised. There's lots of talk now about, well, where's the rampant Chinese demand gone that we've been used to probably over the last 15 years? Everyone's pointing to high Chinese stocks, poor economic growth, and it's kind of put a really depressing spin on how the market looks. But I'd say, look, we can't get too despondent about this. Let's take the long view and consider where, every time I speak to a farmer about markets, I say, right, you've got to have a visibility of how the market and the resultant performance of the business has been on a 5-year basis, rather than getting too hung up on what it means for 1 year.
It feels as if, whilst the market has drifted lower, given that we have a smaller crop domestically, it can't drift drastically lower because it has to incentivise that grain coming out of farm.
Is it becoming a dormant market at this time of year? It's quite seasonal. Everything's known about what's harvested. The two biggest opportunities, I think, for farmers, arable farmers, you think about is how does SFI integrate into the business? Never going to create huge amounts of revenue, but in terms of supporting efficiency, nutrient use efficiency, that fertiliser cost is the biggest cost centre of the arable business. And then understanding how competitive the business is. And, it's a shameless plug for Farm Bench, because it is such a powerful resource. Whether you want to benchmark or whether you want to really get in and understand the crux of how the business is working, because it is a tough sector. It's the most globalised sector we have. There's no real Britishness, no real provenance premium to be had around growing wheat. Unfortunately, at any kind of spec level, wheat is wheat, whether it's grown here, whether it's grown in France, whether it's grown in Germany, whether it's grown in Canada. But stuff happens, doesn't it? So it's very easy to get too down in the doldrums, but I think it's all about having a long view.
And that's a bit of a heads up, I suppose, for work that we're doing at the moment. We're looking at that bigger, wider view of SFI and trying to put some context and some specific figures around the actual impact it has on area. We've got our grain market outlook events coming up through November, where we're going to be sort of releasing some of that information. So that's something to look forward to, and we'll come back on a future episode of the podcast to discuss. But moving on to another sector, Jack, you're saying about cereals is going into that sort of dormant phase as we go through the winter period. Another market in terms of price terms that's been very dormant for this calendar year so far is in the pig sector. And just to give you an idea of price, again, when we started this podcast in early June, the pig price at that time, for the sort of standard pig price that we produced, was 210 pence per kilo. I mean, wow, the roller coaster that's been on. It's now 209 pence per kilo. It has been a very, very stable market.
A sector that's reeling from the events of recent years, isn't it? And it's a sector that's seen consolidation, a number of breeding sows and herd for really understandable reasons. The absolute turmoil that went through with shortage of butchers, backlog of pigs, that sudden explosion in feed prices in early 2022. It's a sector that needs to try and recover. It's the feed price relative to the pork price, as we've touched on previously, is really, really favourable. But I think the issue is more about long-term confidence. To be able to have that confidence to reinvest, you need a vibrant, independent pig sector to be able to work and be able to manage risk and be able to create revenue to fill those bits of demand that are less certain, whether that's out of home, whether that's into export markets as well. as well as into sort of traditional retail.
And you mentioned retail, actually. That's something that in next week's podcast we're going to be looking at, is going back to our retail and consumer insight roots and discussing the work that they're doing at the moment, kind of how they see the demand side of the market, previewing some key material we're going to be releasing at our conference in a couple of weeks' time. But you mentioned, I suppose, just some numbers around the pigs in terms of the estimated net margin for pig production, that at the moment for the middle part of 24, it's been around £15 per head positive net margin.
Yeah.
And we've been positive net margin realistically for about 18 months. But then you put that into the previous context that essentially there was a period of 3 years where they were negative. The pig market, even though we've seen some more positivity in recent terms, it has been something which has been under pressure significantly for a long period.
Yeah, and trying to compete in that protein market overall, now it's competing with poultry, competing for shelf space, trying to get the carcass to balance are really, really important parts of it. Feed is, as a cost point of view, is generally going and has been going in the right direction. That's an important dynamic in terms of balancing the sectors out. There's a challenging thing coming up when we talk about EUDR, so that's deforestation rules coming from soy, the ability to demonstrate that it's coming from a sustainable source. There's a real lack of clarity still. I do fear that might just be a source of some unneeded and unnecessary uncertainty as we try and navigate, well, how do we find a compliant protein source to feed these livestock? We
first started talking, I suppose, doing this kind of thing about trying to explain the principles of agricultural economics and kind of and the markets and how they operate. But we really first started from a food security perspective. And this is a very specific area of food security. And it isn't talking about the retail end of it, but it's talking about how the logistics of a supply chain and the operation of a supply chain create risk, and that sort of bigger structural risk within the industry. And it feels on a lot of things that is still there. That there's a lot of policy risks, regulatory risks that still operate. And even from a Northern Ireland border perspective, going into aspects of the Renewable Energy Directive for cereals, and then, as you say, the deforestation. And this is, I suppose, where I see the niche of what we as AHDB do within this area of economics and markets, is having the time and the brain capacity of the people that we have to distill what that means down for levy payers and then communicate it back to them.
And certainly what we see from outside of the food industry is a very significant risk of two things. One is trying to oversimplify all of the dynamics that are at play in terms of delivering food and food security, but then a lack of appreciation for the sheer scale of economics that are needed to drive the system. It's the old cliche that money makes the world go round, and economics is such an important part of the functioning of the food system. That's reality. I think for me, there's probably a bit too much sentiment attached to things too often. And for me, that's one of the motivations of championing this podcast, is actually economics has to sort of sit at the forefront of what drives decision making and what does sit behind the trends that we see, whether that's in production or export. Now, protein security, food security is a really interesting area. And again, it's misunderstood because I'm going to take you back to A-level biology, which is a number of years ago. But essentially, if you're making protein out of anything, whether it's in a factory or in an animal or in a plant, it's an incredibly energy-intensive process. And that fundamental point doesn't change regardless of how you're making that protein. And so there's a moral argument as well as an economic argument to sort of understand that complex. If a growing population and emerging economies want more protein, how do you generate that protein into a human edible form in a sustainable way?
Right. Shall we take a break, Jack, and shall we get the latest market updates? But also, for those that feel that we are a slick, efficient, highly professional operation, shall we share behind the curtain as to what actually happens when we're recording this podcast?
I'm not sure much of it's suitable, but I'm sure Martin can do a top job in engineering some of the best bits from behind the scenes.
Oh, I need to find the thing. Where is it? Oh, no, that's not it. Oh, hang on. Why is that not coming up? Oh, there it is. No. Sorry, I'm just going to go rescue my wife. The dog is in the office with my wife and it's going mad because he wants to come down here. So hang on a minute. And I know that she'll just get angry and let him out and he'll burst into the middle of the podcast. And sorry.
That might be the bit that wins the award.
I don't think, unless I've missed it completely, did anyone send any mystery words?
Oh,
Have you ever watched Moana?
Yeah.
So Jack, your second line of "You're welcome." Do you think you could do
You're
that
welcome.
by the song in?
In your best Dwayne The Rock Johnson voice.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
They listened to 9 episodes, that one person, this morning. Today. I know with iTunes, I think it plays the next one automatically.
Okay.
And it
So I've
might
fallen
click.
asleep, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely woken up.
Someone woke up middle of the night and was like, I need someone to put me back to sleep. Hang those two idiots on.
no, that's
Right.
a different meaning. Oh,
No, the good ones when you got to Google the meaning, at least I know what mine means, I just didn't really think about how to use it.
oh, this is a stumper. This is.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of the way to build it in. Where we go? Again, I got slightly distracted, Jack, so I looked further forwards at your questions and I just got herbal lays in my mind and kind of got confused. Sorry, I got slightly distracted there, Jack. I would have responded to that, but I started reading the next ones to think about what to say next, and I got really lost in that one about Christmas pantomime cow.
Right, that's what I thought it was, so I think. Brilliant. Actually, Sarah's worked me a favour there. Now I know what the word means.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episodes you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
So we're back with the second part of our Agonomics podcast today, where we're doing a bit of a review of everything that's been happening across all the sectors, and a bit of a farewell to Jack as well. And we've just heard the latest market update, as well as some of the highly professional and slick operations that we have as a production team. And coming back to sectors, Jack, whilst we said that ever since we started this podcast, from a cereals perspective, the market's gone down. From a pork perspective, the market's been pretty stable. Let's look at dairy, because I think we've got some good news in the dairy market in terms of, you know, the Agonomics impact on price. Because mid-June time, let's just look at butter, unsalted. When we started this podcast, the market was trading from around £5,000 to £5,500 a tonne. And in recent weeks, we have seen a significant jump up, pushing towards £7,000 a tonne. I think it's pretty unprecedented, the wholesale market that we're seeing at the moment. And coming back to what you were saying just before the break around the cost and the energy required to make proteins, it's similar from a dairy perspective, isn't it? That processing required to get all of the products out of the raw milk. And if we look at other areas, cheddar prices have been going up. Bulk cream prices have rocketed above the £3,000 a tonne mark as well. And it's basically just that the market is very tight. There is a lot of demand. And now we're entering a really interesting logistical phase where suppliers are actually struggling to move the product around because of the demand is so strong. There isn't just a button that you press and bang, out we go. There's more. There's a processing time that's built in. So it's a very interesting market from a dairy perspective at the moment.
My kind of market of the moment remains the beef market, but I suspect over the next few weeks and months, dairy might become more of an interesting market. We've been expecting those green shoots to come through for dairy for a few months. From a production point of view, again, similar as we talked about pork, the feed cost is falling away, but we've had that incredibly wet late spring, which for grazing farmers and those growing a lot of forage did create concern, and from a grazing point of view has caused some efficiency problems, and that's had a market impact because it's meant that the kind of the seasonal peak in production that we get kind of quite late in the spring hasn't really been as high as it traditionally would, and so hasn't been putting that spot market downward pressure on prices. We haven't maxed out processing capacity, and so there's been enough capacity to deal with the volume of milk coming forward. And I would suggest that the profile this year is kind of a more of a leveler profile, as we haven't had sort of a summer of dry weather, and so grass growth is sort of maintained, and so that's enabled production to maintain. Critical point now coming into the autumn, we've had a reasonable most parts of September, pretty hideous rainfall, which is going to take the edge off, I think, now in the autumn grazing, and may well speed up a bit of a transition to the house period, which farmers want to try and delay that as much as possible without sacrificing efficiency, just because of the costs involved. And this is where I think the power of AHDB can come into its own. We talked right up front when we talked about cereals about that talk of poor Chinese demand. I think you can almost fact check it with actually what's going on with that. Is the dairy market feeling those same forces, or is that the market sort of being talked by commentators just want to put a story behind a price drifting lower?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing of what we do, but is also really important and valuable in the market, is actually talking about stuff that doesn't matter. And if the market isn't doing anything and there isn't anything to look at, then saying that is as equally as important as saying what is driving the market. And I agree that I think the dairy market is definitely going to get interesting. So we produce some, I suppose, indicators looking at the current value of products versus the price of milk. So we call that AMPI and McV and MV, the milk market value. So looking at the milk market value, this is an indicator of the average market value of a litre of milk, which is based on the sort of typical utilisation of milk in the UK. And this correlates strongly with about a 3-month lag with the farm gate milk price. And looking at that milk market value, we have seen that since about March of this year go from 35 pence per litre up to now, where we are in September, up to 45 pence per litre. Wow. So there's been a significant increase, 10 pence a litre increase in that over the last 6-7 months. And it is extremely strongly correlated that then links to a farm gate milk price as well. There may be increases in the milk price coming. So I imagine that there's going to be some press questions that come our way that we're going to have to deal with about, does this mean that the price on the retail shelf is going to increase? And I think that's how we spend a lot of our time, disappointing journalists, explaining how the real world works. And just because something goes up 10% in a commodity market, it doesn't mean that the price of the good on the shelf is going to increase by a proportionate amount. Right, let's go to what we were describing as the market of the moment, looking at the cattle market. And definitely, since we've started this podcast, one thing that has increased in price has been the price of a cow. Deadweight steers, overall price, mid-June, 470, 480 pence per kilo, rocketed through that £5 per kilo mark 2-3 weeks ago, kind of in early September, and now we are standing well above that £5 a kilo mark. It's pretty unprecedented times for the cattle side of the market.
There's still some real fundamental challenges in the supply side with policy change, with the demographics of the industry. And I think ever since direct payments or subsidies were decoupled from production, that will be 20 years ago this January. And since that point, the traditional beef herders sort of continued to trend lower and lower and lower just because of the poor economics. And that's been masked to an extent because we've seen this big rise in the importance of dairy beef. So using calves from the dairy sector to produce a greater amount of beef for the beef sector. We've seen a lot of vertical integration develop. It's an efficient chain. That, in my view, putting it bluntly, I think has masked the reality of the domestic beef supply, because whilst that's been happening, the traditional suckler herds have been falling away. And those suckler herds today still account for 60% of domestic beef production. But we're still seeing that sector consolidate. It's generally, and apologies for the generalisation, but a higher proportion, in my view, of older farmers will be in that traditional suckler beef sector than any other sector. And so there's a real challenge when it comes to generation renewal, and the economics are really, really challenging. So I think this is going to be an incredibly interesting market and sector to watch over the coming weeks, months and years to see how it pans out. And consumers really like beef. And it's such a versatile product. We saw that through the cost of living prices, the power of mince, but then the ability to spoil yourself with a steak and treat yourself either at home or in the out-of-home market.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to be interested to, again, as I mentioned in earlier on, talk to our retail and consumer guys next week about what that sort of demand outlook is, and see if as we're moving out of a sort of cost of living crisis and inflation starts to reduce. We've seen for the past 4 years that the idea of normal consumer patterns completely turned on its head, first with COVID, lockdowns, etc., and then going through that inflationary pressure as well. The interesting thing in my mind is, without that crisis happening to be the thing that drives consumers, what are their next choices going to be? What then happens? And I think it also links back to kind of the bigger, wider issues within the economy as well, that, whilst we may not be in a position of seeing rampant food price inflation, there's still very slow growth within the wider economy. And this is where agricultural economics meets that bigger world of macroeconomics as well, that it all links in together. That view of how the domestic economy is going to operate, it seems as if there isn't really a huge amount of positive news about it at the moment. Talk about interest rates maybe not reducing as quickly as was first thought, and therefore is that going to impact on the way people spend as well? And therefore, coming back to, like you're saying, about frequency of out-of-home consumption as well as the products they buy, is it going to basically potentially continue that demand for flexible products of mince? And again, it changes the way the carcass balance operates. And then we bring in the export markets as well. I think, as you say, if dairy is going to be something that's going to be hot on the heels of beef market, even though the price of the cattle market may change as we go forward, I think just that supply and demand dynamic is something that is very interesting.
And I think one thing we undervalue is the economics of convenience, the importance of convenience in the modern day world for families who are stuff just needs to happen because everybody's working, everyone's got busy schedules, and the harsh reality is everybody's got less time to sort of really think about it. So the value of convenience and the versatility of products is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for all those people that go and drive their cars into a load of water, as soon as they get home and their 3-year-old's hungry, they want something to feed them quickly with, don't they? So, yeah, that's what you need.
Absolutely.
Right. Jack, I fear the time is coming to say farewell. And also put out an advert, I suppose, in a way that, I'm looking for a new co-presenter. I feel I've got to be a bit kind of wary of this, though. What I'm worried about, let's be honest, Jack, we're both follically challenged. What I don't want is someone coming in with, like, David Beckham in the late 90s, long blonde flowing locks and kind of wearing an Alice band and a sarong. We need a hard-hitting economist coming in.
We do. And, the controversial, the best economists get less use out of a hairbrush than the rest.
So for the final time, and unsurprisingly from my side, I have no idea what your mystery word was. I missed that completely.
Yeah, I will admit I had actually forgotten I had a mystery word. Having been arrogant at the beginning of the recording, said, there's loads of opportunities to slip it in. I had realised about 30 seconds from the end that actually I'd forgotten to use it. Likewise, I had no idea. In traditional style, couldn't spot yours anywhere.
Alice band.
Well, in a similar vein, I went hairbrush.
Oh, again, two linked ones. Evidently that was,
My personal favourite, though, has to be conservatory and conservatoire. That stands out as the best.
Me too. Just for saying conservatoire makes me feel posh.
Take it when we can find it.
I think the only thing that leaves me, Jack, is to say thank you for your insight and participation and everything you've done for the podcast. And you are welcome back any time.
That's brilliant. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to be a part of this podcast. I think a lot of people see economics as kind of something they don't want to understand, or it's too nerdy, or it's too academic. And I think that's a real shame. And I think one thing we ought to do, HDB needs to do, is just continue to make it accessible, because it is really important. It's why fundamentally people do stuff, why people run a business, why people go to work, is to generate economic activity and generate a return on something. And so it is so fundamental to this industry, especially where there's and I'm not knocking the presence of tradition and everything else, that's really important, but fundamentally the economics of this sector as a whole, this industry, is really, really important, not as understood as it should be. And that's, I think, if this podcast can help a little bit with that, then I think it's doing a great job. I'll continue to be an avid listener, always happy to come back as a guest, and I hope it continues to grow.